So I'm about ready to start my walk and gather some plants, even though it's a little precipitating out. And I just wanted to take a moment to show you this thicket by the trailhead, because there's a lot of really wonderful plants in here. And one of my personal favorites, and something that has been on my mind a lot lately, is this little plant here called Yarrow. And we know it's Yarrow because of the white flowers. We can see that there's 5 petals with a yellow center. And it has these wispy fern-like leaves. And Yarrow is known as Achillea. And Achillea is named after, you guessed it, Achilles in Greek mythology. And that myth has a lot of knowledge in it that we can learn from. It's thought that Achilles created tinctures that he then rubbed all over his body, except for his Achilles heel. And if we remember, his Achilles heel is really the only place on Achilles where he was vulnerable. And so the belief is that he rubbed the tinctures of Yarrow all over his body except for his heel. And when the poisonous arrows came, he was pretty much invincible and immune to their poisons except for the place on his heel. It's also said that Achilles used a poultice of the flowers and the leaves on the wounds of his soldiers, and he would chew up those leaves and he would put them on the wounds, and it would stop the bleeding. And so in that story we learn a lot about Yarrow as being a blood purifier, as a wound healer, helping to coagulate the blood and stop the wounds from bleeding. We also know Yarrow to work with bruises. And my personal experience with Yarrow was actually as a bruise medicine or a bone medicine. And a number of years ago, I took a really horrible fall on some black ice. And at the time, I wasn't really paying attention to my self-care. And I went about my business and I went into the lecture. And by the time I got home, about 3 or 4 hours later, my arm was completely swollen, and I had hit the ground with such force that I thought that I had blacked out for a second. And I really came to believe that I had broken my arm. However, it was late, and I didn't want to go, to the emergency room, so I actually called up a friend of mine who's another herbalist and spoke with her husband, who's an EMT, and we decided that if it wasn't better by the morning, I would definitely have to go to the hospital. I could still move it. It was just extremely sore. It made me feel nauseous from the pain. And what I did was I took that night, I had created a really strong Yarrow infusion, and I decocted it. And that's just a fancy word for saying I reduced it by half, and I made it very concentrated. And I took strips of cheesecloth and whatever flannel I had, and I soaked it in this Yarrow, essentially this Yarrow decoction, and I wrapped up my arm with it. And the next morning, my arm was sore, but not to the point that it was the night before, and it actually brought up all of the bruising that was sitting on the bone, because the bone took the most pressure. And I'm trying to see if there's any other Yarrow, but I think most of it's going to be in this area here. And it took that bruising from the bone and brought it up to the surface where it could dissipate. And within probably a week or so, I didn't even realize that I had fallen. And while, do I recommend this for everybody? No, but this is just how I personally worked with Yarrow. You could see another stage of yarrow where they have a little bit of the buds here, but they're not quite ready to emerge. This one is the buds are a little bit closer to opening, and probably within the next day or so, the next couple days, they'll be opened. This particular has some open, some closed. And so you can see that even within these few plants that there's a couple different stages of yarrow. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about with the yarrow that I was getting the message for was to talk about the overall environment of yarrow. And yarrow in this particular area you could see is growing with honeysuckle. It's growing with various types of rose. It's also growing these plants here. They're growing with grape, again with the roses, and then a little further back over on this side they're growing with raspberry. They're kind of thick in there. And down here we have the white clover. And when I think about yarrow, I think about what it's growing with, that raspberry, the grape, the white clover, the rose. And all of these medicines are what we call women's medicine. They're nourishing to the blood. They're nourishing to the reproductive organs. And so all of these together would make a very nice infusion to drink. And actually when I'm done here, I'm going to be gathering some. I'm gathering some for a poultice for my ankle to help with the inflammation, help with a strained ankle from moving some furniture recently. But also in terms of the reproductive organs, to nourish them, help get the blood moving and flowing, right? Helping with some of those cramps, with inflammation, helping with any kind of unproductive, feverish. Sometimes as women, when we're pre-menstruating, we tend to get that feverish, that clammy sort of feeling. So working with yarrow for that as well, and nourishing. Remember, when we're working with the plants, we're nourishing the whole body. We're nourishing and meeting ourselves exactly where we're at, and not just looking at individual symptoms, but how does the plant work with our overall body. And so today the message was that nourishing for human, particularly female reproduction, helping the blood to move. Also, the fever doesn't have to be pre-menstruation associated. It could also be, we have a cold, we have a flu, getting our body to do what our body does best, and that's to sweat out whatever toxins are in there, and just getting the overall blood to flow and the body to expel what it no longer needs. And so that's just a little bit about yarrow and how I am working with yarrow, grape, raspberry, and some of the other plants around here today. Hope you have a wonderful day.